So, given that it's mid-September, you can probably surmise that I am currently in the process of assembling another collection of movies for
Schlocktober.
The culling process is always difficult because I end up with stuff I really want to showcase but maybe doesn't qualify for a full episode. Usually because what I want to talk about is some effect or more often some monster that's only one part of the film. That's where this week's show comes in. 5 movie monsters that just never scored the stardom of a Frankenstein or a Godzilla but deserve their time in the sun. These are
MovieBob's Forgotten Monsters!
Number 5. The Baby from It's Alive. It's Alive is a movie that I think people know more by reputation than by actually watching it. It's the infamous first and best killer baby movie, and was considered to be in shockingly bad taste even in the cultural war zone of the 1970s, courtesy of subversive exploitation legend Larry Cohen. The premise, a seemingly normal middle-class couple's second child is inexplicably born with fangs, claws, and superhuman strength, and after massacring the entire delivery room staff at the hospital, save for its mother, the baby takes off on a feral rampage through suburban Los Angeles. What makes it memorable, even beyond the singularly creepy yet ridiculous image of the rarely seen monster itself, is that the film plays the scenario 100% straight. It also never fully reveals why the creature actually happened. The specter of environmental degradation is raised alongside nuclear power, and it's even subtly hinted that the fetus might have been aware that its parents had briefly considered terminating and developed its ferocity in self-defense. But the most unnerving suggestion is that it might not be a monster at all, but an early preview of what humanity will soon evolve into to survive in an increasingly dangerous world. The final scene still knocks me on my ass to this day. If you've never seen this, check it out. Number 4. Gezerah from Yog, Monster from Space. Okay, technically the Yog of the title is actually an energy force from space that possesses and enlarges common animals from Earth to do its bidding. The movie is actually called Space Amoeba in the original Japanese. Now, there's a giant turtle and a giant lobster in here too, but I'm all about the giant cuttlefish, Gezerah. I mean, just look at that thing. I think what I love best is you can see the poor guy wearing the suit has to move by shuffling like a kid playing the tree in a school play. Yeah, I know, he's unfathomably stupid looking, but you won't forget him anytime soon, I can promise you that. I mean, come on, admit it. You kinda want to see this movie now, which is actually one of the more interesting non-Godzilla monster productions to come out of Toho Studios. Number 3. The She-Creature from The She-Creature. For a time in the mid-1950s, there was this brief mainstream fascination with the idea of people supposedly regressing to past lives through hypnosis. The fad inspired a slew of trashy novels and cheap horror films, though this one was probably the most unique. An evil hypnotist uses his abilities to cause a young woman to regress, but instead of past lives, she dredges up past stages of evolution, which the hypnotist then brings into the physical world to kill people. Yeah, that thing looks like a stage of human evolution. It's mostly noteworthy for being one of the more interestingly designed monsters of the era. I mean, just look at that thing. It looks like it should be fighting Kamen Rider now, not chasing D-list actors around the drive-in 60 years ago. Number 2. The Stuff from The Stuff. Another great one from Larry Cohen. The monster in this one is Killer Gogurt, basically. Okay, actually, The Stuff is a horror satire about an ancient, primordial colony creature. Look, it's the Blob, okay? You get the idea. Whatever you want to call it, it has the ability to infect, control, and ultimately consume human bodies. And it's out to assimilate all of humanity via what turns out to be a pretty shrewd plan for a sentient goop monster, packaging and marketing itself as the next big thing in snack food. Mankind's only hope is a crusading corporate spy, played by a pre-Law and Order and pre-crazy person, Michael Moriarty. I'm honestly surprised no one has remade this yet. Number 1. The Mark Hamill Bug from The Guyver. Yeah, I know, Guyver 2 Dark Hero is supposedly the better of the 2 live-action Guyver movies, because it's darker and serious and slightly closer in tone to the manga, and David Hayter is in it, but you know what else Guyver 2 was? Boring. Really, really boring. The first one is dumb, but they're both dumb. At least the first one has a sense of humor about itself, and you know what else Guyver 2 doesn't have? This, slightly compressed for time, scene of Mark Hamill transforming into a giant bug. See? Giant Mark Hamill bug. Guyver 1 wins. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.
It is 1976. The American merchant vessel Petrox Explorer has just set sail from the port of Surabaya in search of oil. What they find will shock the world.
we may be sailing into the history books.
They will discover an uncharted island that is the home of the most incredible creature on the face of the earth. Dino De Laurentiis presents King Kong.
Yes, friends, it's once again Schlocktober, the time of year when I put all other things on hold to bring you a month of obscure and/or bizarre horror and monster movies because I want to, alright? And this year we kick off with arguably the king of movie monsters, Kong, the eighth wonder of the world. 1933's King Kong didn't necessarily start the 20th century's obsession with monster apes, but it definitely solidified it and turned Great Big Monkey into the referential touchstone of movie monsters for decades to come. There was a sequel, there were successors, there were rip-offs, but it wasn't until 1976 that someone just up and remade the thing. So goes the story, infamous Italian mega-producer Dino De Laurentiis had become fixated on topping Steven Spielberg's history-making hit Jaws, and somehow he concluded that the way to conquer the newest movie monster was to revive the most famous one, so he set about securing the remake rights to King Kong. What followed was one of the most notoriously bloated, out-of-control, gossip-fueled productions in Hollywood history. De Laurentiis and company went all out in grand 70s disaster movie fashion with a big cast, opulent sets, and an army of lawyers on a mission to enforce Universal Pictures' dubious claim to own the copyright to any associations of the name Kong with depictions of gorillas. Funny side note to that, Universal would ultimately lose that argument legally in 1982 when they sued the upstart American arm of a then little-known Japanese outfit called Nintendo for calling their new arcade game Donkey Kong. The American lawyer who successfully argued the case for Nintendo was rewarded with a $30,000 sailboat named Donkey Kong and exclusive worldwide rights to put that name on any other sailboats he might wish to own in the future. That lawyer's name was Kirby. No, seriously, the guy's name was really John Kirby, and a lot of people think that's who this Kirby was named after. Anyway, the King Kong production is best remembered for its colossal publicity campaign based around a whopper of a claim, that this new Kong would be portrayed not by an animated figure like the original, but by a life-sized Kong robot. Now that is how you get some butts in seats. Hey guys, we actually built a 50-foot gorilla. Come and watch it f*** up New York City. Unfortunately, they were kinda sorta playing fast and loose with a little white fib of they were lying, pretty much. The giant mechanical Kong was really only built for a couple of stationary shots, barely functioned, and looked kinda terrible. The vast majority of Kong's performance is just rising star FX whiz Rick Baker stomping around in what is not one of his better gorilla suits on miniature sets, and the audience could pretty much tell. The film was still kind of a hit, but it quickly became more well remembered for the giant robot debacle, the publicity, and De Laurentiis' hyperbolic self-promotion. Some were expecting it to kick off renewed interest in the then-flagging giant monster genre, but outside some overseas cheapies, produced to cash in on the hype like China's Mighty Peking Man, Korea's Ape, aka Attack of the Giant Horny Gorilla, and Italy's Yeti Giant of the 20th century, it didn't really pan out that way. At the time, even Kong's one-time rival Godzilla was on his last legs, though in a final irony, the US posters for his then swan song Godzilla vs. Megalon aimed to cash in on the new Kong by depicting its monsters also fighting atop the oh yeah, there's also that. One of the reasons you don't see this movie or its original poster around all that much lately is that since they'd opted to move the story to the present, it was decided that instead of recreating the Empire State Building scene from the original, the new Kong would climb the relatively new World Trade Center towers. And yeah, the whole big shootout helicopter fight just isn't as much fun to watch anymore, so that happened. To be frank, the movie just isn't very good. It's trying to be a big airport-style disaster movie with all the characters and human drama, but they're all so dull and underwritten it feels like an eternity until Kong shows up. Also, they opted not to try creating any dinosaurs for this version. Instead of a tyrannosaur, Kong just fights a snake, which means there's nothing else interesting for anyone to do on that island other than keep looking for Kong. You might be wondering why I chose to lead Schlocktober off with a mediocre movie I don't much care for. Well, it's because that backstory is kind of interesting, firstly, but mainly because I needed it as background context for our next two movies. Come back next week and find out what they are. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture. Last week, we revisited the slow-motion train wreck that was the production of Dino De Laurentiis' 1976 remake of King Kong. The film was moderately successful, but not the Jaws-level transformational blockbuster it had been billed as, and no one was really asking for another one. But De Laurentiis and company were adamant that their Kong was franchise material, and they had ambitious plans for sequels. Except they didn't actually get one made until 1986 with a smaller budget but a bigger idea. This time, Kong would be the hero and get the girl. They called the sequel King Kong Lives, which I guess is one way to get the whole "wait, didn't King Kong die in the first one" question out of the way. It turns out the fall didn't kill him, it just injured him badly enough to put him into a coma. Linda Hamilton has the human lead role as a doctor overseeing the operation of keeping Kong alive because science. Anyway, the project is running out of time because Kong's heart is failing, and while they've constructed a giant mechanical heart to replace it, he's going to need a blood transfusion to survive the surgery, which is problematic because as far as anyone knows, Kong is the only one of his species.
Only one thing can save Kong.
What's that?
A miracle.
But, in an astounding coincidence, some random guy in the jungle has just stumbled upon, yes, another Kong. And this one is female. The movie calls her Lady Kong. Why not Queen Kong? Because that was already the title of a British Kong parody that Universal and De Laurentiis had sued to keep from opening stateside a few years ago. But yes, this is going where you think it is. King Kong Lives is a love story with giant monkeys. So, they fly Lady Kong to the States and set her up as King Kong's blood donor so they can commence with the operation.
Just take it easy! You are dealing with a lady!
And yes, if you're gonna make a movie about giant gorilla heart surgery, you might as well go for it.
That's good. Reduce the tension there a little bit.
No more.
More suction. I've got it. Clamp that, please. Fire on the band. Reader clamp.
See, wasn't that cool? Alright, at this point you kinda have to stop asking the movie to explain anything, but somehow the transfusion makes Kong and Lady Kong psychically linked, and Kong is in love.
That horny son of a bitch. He smells a female a mile away.
So he breaks them out of the facility and goes on the run, while Linda Hamilton and not Indiana Jones follow them to the mountains. And yep, here's King Kong getting busy. But then the mean army general, who will be our villain for the piece, shows up and tries to blow the pair away. They get separated and Lady Kong is captured, while Kong becomes the target of an organized hunting effort.
Are those weapons loaded?
You bet, General. So are we.
Which does not end well for the hunters.
More.
There's a ticking clock on all of this, by the way, and that Kong's artificial heart is unstable and Linda Hamilton is tracking its power levels, all of which is just so much setting the table for the big finale where Kong takes on the army to try and free his girlfriend, who's also pregnant, by the way.
Fire!
You hit the female! She's in labor!
I said fire, damn it! Take it!
As our story ends, Kong saves the day but ends up biting it for real this time because of the stress on his heart, leaving Lady Kong and Son of Kong to book it for the jungle and sequels that would never come. King Kong Lives is a pretty bad movie, but I kind of love it. It's more fun than the first one, at least, and even if that fun comes mostly in the form of insanity like Gulliver-style heart surgery, giant monkey romance, and the rest of it, sometimes you've got to take what you can get. You may recall from the previous episode that these later-day Kong movies were part of an obsession mega-producer Dino De Laurentiis had with creating his own answer to Jaws. Well, in between the two Kong movies, he produced another attempt that took a more direct route, and I'll show that to you next time. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture. Schlocktober 2012's previous two movies covered the two King Kong films produced as part of Italian mega-producer Dino De Laurentiis' decade-long obsession with making a monster movie that was a bigger or at least equal smash to Steven Spielberg's Jaws. He wasn't the only person trying to do this, of course. There were a lot of crappy killer sea creature movies made in the late 70s for the same reason. And 1 year after the first of Dino's brand-name giant gorilla flicks debuted, he produced a straight-up Jaws imitator of his very own, Orca the Killer Whale, which, in my opinion, is both the best of the many Jaws clones and also kind of a genuinely good, if completely bonkers movie in its own right, taking what could have been the setup for a rote, generic animal rampage movie and pumping it up into a kind of epic operatic tragedy, in which this happens.
I'm okay now!
Okay, so our story begins with and largely follows Richard Harris is in this, and so is Charlotte Rampling, as a grizzled Irish fisherman named Nolan eking out a living in Newfoundland catching ocean animals for zoos and aquariums. As the film starts, he's supposed to be trapping a great white shark. Huh, you don't think they're really gonna...
Jesus, what did that?
Yup, Orca has just made the argument that it's better than Jaws because our fish can beat up your fish.
There's only one creature in the world that could do that. A killer whale.
What's weird about Orca is that it's a much more exploitation-style monster movie than Jaws was on a story level, but aesthetically it goes beyond looking and sounding serious to downright, well, highbrow. It features a lot of stunning nature footage of real orcas, and often set to one of the most haunting scores Ennio Morricone ever recorded. Seriously, a whole bunch of this movie looks and sounds like this. Anyway, Nolan decides that catching an orca would be the big score he's always been looking for, so he and his crew strike out to do just that. They catch what they think is a male, but it turns out to be a pregnant female, and things go very, very wrong for all involved. It's actually a really explicit, hard-to-watch scene, and I don't really think I can show you very much of it.
She's losing so much blood.
Yeah, that's about all I can show. Short version, the trauma of the capture causes the female to miscarry, and she and the calf both ultimately die. Her mate, still in the water, watches the whole thing and freaks right the hell out. You can see where this is going. Orca is a revenge movie. It's The Punisher if The Punisher was an orca. This is also where the movie starts to go a little bit nuts.
We know very little about the nature of the whale's intelligence, except that it exists and is powerful.
See, the male orca has now sworn revenge on Nolan, and you'd think said revenge would be a bit limited since Nolan can just, avoid his comeuppance by simply staying out of the ocean.
It is known that these whales have great memory, and even after many numbers of years pass, they always remember the human being who had tried to harm them.
You'd think that, but you'd be underestimating Orca, who leaves its mate's corpse in the harbor as a warning to its human target, and then sets about depleting the area's entire fish population, thus turning Nolan's neighbors and colleagues against him. Okay, smart plan, but you can kind of imagine an Orca coming up with it. This Orca, however, is so smart that he also has a working knowledge of human energy infrastructure vis-a-vis the town's coastal gas lines. Yup, the Orca just blew up a building. This is a movie where that happens. Oh, and then Orca knocks down another building and bites off Bo Derek's leg. This is the other thing I like about Orca. It has some really dense moral ambiguity that you just don't see in most revenge movies, cetacean mammal related or otherwise. It's hard not to just hate Nolan for what happened to the female and root for Orca to kick his ass, especially since it does such a good job of giving the surviving animal a personality. But it also lets us spend time with Nolan and understand why he's such a grim, miserable dude at this point. And it doesn't shy away from the fact that Orca is straight up murdering people just to draw this one guy into a fight. Ultimately, Nolan mans up and allows Orca to engage him in direct confrontation among the icebergs of the Straits of Belle Isle, where, you know what, I'm just gonna show it to you.
Here! Catch!
Yeah, the movie really did just do the two mortal enemies stare down eyeball to eyeball close-up thing, with a guy versus a whale. What else can I say? And so ends Orca, if nothing else an effective curative for everyone who's ever watched Free Willy and wondered when that dude was just gonna take some f***ing initiative. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture. And Schlocktober 2012 rolls on. Some of you may have been wondering where the Schlocktober pumpkins went during last week's look at Orca. Well, funny story. Orcas are actually the natural enemy of the Cursubitaceae squash family. Yeah. So a lot of people don't realize that, since pumpkins don't tend to grow anywhere near where orcas tend to be, but when they do run into each other, let me tell you, they don't get along. So, yeah, that's what happened. Anyway, they're back now. Thus far, Schlocktober has been a little bigger this year than last year, with all three movies thus far being pretty well known and at least one of them being something of a major blockbuster in its time. Well, this week we're going obscure. Really obscure. If you've seen this before, hats off to you.
70 million years ago, the creatures known as dinosaurs mysteriously disappeared from the planet Earth. It was thought that they would never be seen again. But in the year 2000, the people of Earth were amazed and terrified by the greatest catastrophe ever known to mankind, the reappearance of the dinosaurs.
The Earth is ours!
Okay, some context is probably needed regarding Attack of the Super Monsters. In the early 80s, home video was almost as revolutionary as the internet would be a decade later. For the first time, you didn't have to watch something on TV's schedule, you could just push a button and start it up. Unfortunately, not everything you might have wanted to see was actually on video. This is why there were so many strange, cheap videos in the horror and children's section back then. Those audiences were starved for content, so you could release pretty much anything, especially if you could get it for cheap, like, say, a quickie import from Japan you could quickly dub and remarket however you wanted and turn a profit. For example, this was how American audiences first experienced Hayao Miyazaki's Nausicaa Valley of the Wind. Really. As you've no doubt already guessed from the footage, Attack of the Super Monsters is one of these Eastern imports, a movie actually comprised of a handful of re-edited episodes from the 1977 Japanese series Kyoryo Daisenso Eisenbogu, roughly translated as Dinosaur War IZENBORG. It's a tokusatsu series about giant monsters attacking the Earth here meaning major metropolitan centers in Japan, naturally. Our story? Well, this.
Though some of the creatures are willing to live peacefully underground, they are forced to attack humans by their mad ruler, Emperor Tyrannus. For with his superpowers, he is capable of turning any animal into a murderous beast that will obey his every command.
Yeah, the dinosaurs talk in this. It's odd. What's kind of fun at first is that instead of being opposed by a good giant guy or even the usual costumed superheroes, Earth here defends itself mostly with elaborate vehicles that seem to relish their own obvious toy origins. So it's Ultraman meets Thunderbirds. I can dig it. But where are all the people? Well...
You can't hide!
Yeah. Monster suits, toy planes, anime people. You have to wonder if even Japan looked at this and said, You think this might be a little too us?
What is that thing? Oh!
What you're looking at is a Tyrannosaurus, king of dinosaurs.
Okay, so our heroes are the usual anime and/or tokusatsu stock team. Professor Science Von Mustache, the nerd, the fat guy, the girl, and her brother, the humorless, taciturn, jerk-faced leader who for some reason is always right about everything ever. Their names are Jim and Jem, by the way, and they're twins. That's supposed to be important because they've been kitted out with bionic superpowers, which they access via a process where they merge bodies into a single half-male, half-female super being called Gemini.
Jim!
Jim! Gemini!
Gemini!
Okay, so that's kind of bizarre on its face, but is it just me, or does the fact that they're siblings make it just kind of icky? Like, ew. You know what I mean? Yeah. Little too intimate, kinda, is all I'm saying. Sorta gross. Anyway, fusing into borderline incestuous composite gender Superman only lasts for about 3.5 minutes, and for some reason also changes their plane into a 7-year-old's idea of a much, much more effective plane, and they invariably dispatch the monster of the day so efficiently you have to wonder why they didn't just do that in the first place. And since this is an episode compilation movie, you get to see this play out with very little variation about 4 more times before a brief non-ending. The only real notable moment being the one-time Gem kinda sorta stands up to Captain No Fun here.
It was his fault.
I don't appreciate your telling me what to do with my money or my blouse.
You're too soft-hearted. I'm going to have to talk to Michael about this myself.
Over my dead body, you will.
Almost.
Oh, you may be my brother, but I hate you.
Stop it right now. I'm sorry, Jim, but we can't afford to be acting like spiteful children now. We have a job to do.
But otherwise, it's a lot of this.
Oh my gosh! The super monster known as Ashtaroth controls the rats with the vibrating hum of the armored plates on his back, causing them to become bloodthirsty fiends.
You puny humans! You can't hurt me!
I think we've been hit.
The super monsters will attack again.
Gemini! You cannot save the human race!
Attack of the Super Monsters is one of those videos I think a lot of people might have seen as kids and then assumed they'd hallucinated. For years, you could only get it on unfortunate bootlegs, but believe it or not, this actually did come out on DVD recently, so hunt it down if this sort of nonsense be your thing. Next week on Schlocktober? Well, that would be telling. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture. So, I imagine the big question is, how am I possibly going to top last week's movie, Attack of the Super Monsters? I mean, short of showing you some of the clips I ran out of room for last time, that is.
What was their purpose? Why had they suddenly reappeared? The answer was a fearful one indeed.
You will all be destroyed! Then you will all die!
I'm going to ram it and blow him to kingdom come.
We'll be killed!
You won't, my friend. Farewell.
Jerry!
Nope, not gonna milk it. Could milk it, not gonna milk it. Anyway, this week's movie is Equinox, which was released in 1970 but actually made in the mid-1960s as an amateur movie project by a then 20-year-old kid named Dennis Muren. Is that name familiar to you? If so, it's probably because not long after this he'd become a rising star in the world of special effects, instrumental in the production of, well, these. Yeah, he's kind of important. But back then, like so many others, he was just a young guy who'd grown up obsessed with old sci-fi and monster movies, part of the nationwide army of pre-digital movie geeks united by fanzines like Famous Monsters, which really did function like a pre-internet internet in terms of networking. And in 1965, he and some of his like-minded pals, including Jim Danforth and David Allen, started making a $6,500 homegrown monster movie called The Equinox, A Journey into the Supernatural. Our story, a pair of college-age couples go exploring in the woods and find a mysterious book, the reading of which appears to open a gateway to another dimension and flood the area with various monsters. And yes, that's very much the same basic story as the much better known Evil Dead, made under very similar circumstances about 15 years later. There's some confusion as to how aware the makers of Evil Dead were of the relatively obscure Equinox at the time, but other than the setup, they aren't terribly similar. Actually, plot is kind of being charitable with Equinox anyway. It plays like exactly what it is, a fan film, a bunch of young folks making a movie in tribute to the movies that had inspired them. In this case, it's a Ray Harryhausen monster flick on a budget, functioning mostly as a test reel for special effects techniques they'd been studying all those years. There's a big King Kong type guy. A disappearing, reappearing castle.
What's a castle doing in this area?
An octopus that tears up a cabin. A big winged devil. And even a giant. And what's cool about the giant is, that's not a green screen shot. That's an in-camera effect. The guy playing the giant is standing on a platform closer to the camera, dressed to match the terrain several yards behind him where the little guy is standing. Cool, huh? Here's where this starts to get interesting. The movie actually came out decent enough that Murin and company decided to try shopping it to various distributors, eventually finding a taker in Jack H. Harris, who specialized in offbeat genre pictures like Dinosaur and The Blob. Harris picked the film up, but there was a small catch. At only 71 minutes long, it was too short for theaters. But Harris liked the movie, so he and his friend, director Jack Woods, sought out and brought back the cast of amateur local actors who'd appeared in the original 5 years earlier and shot some new scenes to pad out the running time. Woods himself appeared as a new villain who somehow arouses absolutely no suspicions despite being named Park Ranger Asmodeus. The reshoots make the movie pretty strange, honestly, a weird mix of more innocent 60s monster fandom and more lurid, aggressive early 70s satanic horror aesthetics. But the monster movie stuff was still a lot of fun, and it earned the film a proper place as a late-night TV staple throughout the 70s. In the 80s, it was re-released to home video as The Beast, but after that it pretty much disappeared from the cultural radar save for magazine articles and documentaries about its creators, who'd all gone on to make big names for themselves. David Allen went on to become one of the industry's top stop-motion animators, while Jim Danforth became protege to his idol Ray Harryhausen and a sought-after creator of matte paintings. But in 2006, specialty DVD outfit par excellence The Criterion Collection brought the film out of mothballs for a lavish 2-disc set that included interviews, commentaries, retrospectives, and for the first time ever, the original uncut 1967 version of the film, which for the record is the better one. Definitely worth seeking out for fans of obscure early work of present-day legends. And so, Schlocktober 2012 comes to a close. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. I leave you once more with Emperor Tyrannus.